It's been barely a blink of an eye since the 2020 election finally ended, and already 2 more races are underway in Massachusetts, one for mayor of Boston this fall, and now the 2022 race for governor. The latter kicked off yesterday when former state Senator Ben Downing threw his hat in the ring. The Pittsfield-born Democrat represented a large swath of western Massachusetts for 10 years before stepping down in 2017. Since then, he's served as a vice president at the Boston Renewable Energy company Nexamp and moved to East Boston. So far, he's the only candidate officially in the running. Incumbent Charlie Baker has yet to announce his plans, but another Democrat, Harvard professor and author Danielle Allen, told us today on Boston Public Radio that she's exploring a run as well. Ben Downing joins me now. Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Good to see you too, Jim.
Speaking of doing this, why are you doing this?
I'm running to build a fairer, stronger Massachusetts. I think Massachusetts' potential is limitless, but our leadership hasn't brought the urgency to tapping into that potential that we need to addressing the big problems that are facing us: economic and racial injustice, climate change.
So is Baker part of the equation, or is he irrelevant to the candidacy?
Governor Baker isn't a part of the equation in that I'm running whether Governor Baker runs for re-election or not. He is a part of the equation in that our leadership for the better part of the last 20 years in Massachusetts hasn't acted with a sense of urgency that we need it to.
Well, has the Democratic leadership in the legislature where you served acted with what you consider to be an adequate sense of urgency? They have an overwhelming majority, as you well know.
No, they haven't, not nearly enough. On some issues, they've risen to the occasion. This is not a Charlie Baker issue. This is a leadership issue when it comes to Beacon Hill generally.
So, first of all, as you know, taxes, just for a second, Charlie Baker made clear yet again during his budget release the other day, he's against the broad-based tax. Do you think we need taxes in Massachusetts for example, for things like transportation, which obviously would be a huge help to where you come from, connecting Western Mass to Eastern Mass? Are taxes needed?
We absolutely need to look at comprehensive tax reform. We need it to be able to make the investments in transportation, in early education, in public higher education. And to take that off the table, as Governor Baker has, is one of the reasons why Massachusetts income inequality grows and why we aren't able to grow a strong middle class and reduce poverty.
When you mention Governor Baker there being averse to taxes, as you know, once again, the legislature could pass a tax increase, and when vetoed by Governor Baker, could overwhelmingly override that veto. So what do you do about another example is I read that you support 100% renewable energy by 2030. The Democratic legislature couldn't even agree on that same goal by 2045. How do you deal with people in your own party who are as resistant to change in some, but admittedly not all areas?
That's part of the reason for getting into this campaign so early, Jim. We need the time to be able to build a coalition, to make the case and have the debate for why Massachusetts needs to have more urgency from its leadership on these issues.
What do you think is the most important thing you did with your decade in the legislature, other than voluntarily resign? By the way, a lot of pals talk about term limiting themselves. Very few actually do it. You did. What's the most important achievement, do you think, in your decade there?
I think the most important thing was, quite frankly, for me, the being accessible to voters. I held regular office hours in all of the 52 communities I represented. That's where I learned the most about the issues that mattered in the district that I represented.
You mentioned, or I mentioned, one of us mentioned, you represented Western Mass. You now live in East Boston. As a Boston resident, well, whether you were or not, but particularly as a Boston resident, I'm sure you read the story either in the Globe the other day or heard it on GBH about the embarrassingly low percentage of city contracts that go to minority-owned businesses, less than 1% for both black and Latinos, and I think Asian Americans somewhere in the 1% range. There's been a huge debate also about state contracts for minority-owned businesses, better but not good enough. What do you do about that?
So it's frustrating to no end, and I think the challenge here, Jim, and we've seen this even with the vaccine rollout, right, is that we establish systems and then presume that all communities will have the same access to that system. We have to be intentional about our outreach and building that capacity and making sure that minority businesses, that Black and Brown owned businesses know of these opportunities, can apply for these opportunities. Oftentimes the contracts are too large and those companies don't have the capacity to take them all on. We've got to break them down and make it accessible to all of these businesses so they can grow and flourish.
Well, you mentioned the COVID situation, and I'm sure you and everyone viewing knows people of color are getting sicker, they're dying more, they're getting fewer vaccinations, fewer tests. What do you do about that?
So first, at the front end of the vaccine or at the front end of the pandemic, we should have had greater worker protections in place so that everyone was on the same level playing field when it came to responding to this. That would have meant emergency sick time for all essential workers. Second, moving forward, testing should have been in these communities far earlier, and now we should have had more vaccine equity. We should have had more of the vaccination sites in communities. So it's not enough to say, Chelsea, you were the epicenter of the pandemic, and everyone in Chelsea, you've got to find a way to get to Foxborough to get to a mass vaccination site. We've got to be better about that.
So I assume you know better than I that there haven't been many governors elected from the Berkshires. I know you're a Bostonian now, but from the Berkshires. So we know Jane Swift, obviously, who was acting governor when Paul Cellucci went to Canada. Here's the quiz before you go. Who was the last governor elected from the Berkshires, and when was he elected? Senator, this is the key for you. Who is it?
Winthrop Murray Crane, and I believe it was the early part of last century. I'm not sure of the exact time.
Well, it was 1899, and if you want to be successful, you better know that going forward. Senator Downing, you were close enough. Congratulations on your candidacy, and we hope to talk to you a lot in the months ahead. Thanks so much.
Looking forward to it, Jim. Thanks.